Hello everyone, welcome to Learnfinity. Today we are going to see about Google Gemini. We'll deep dive more about Google Gemini and we'll do a small capstone project using Google Gemini's capabilities. So before we get started, let me share my screen. All right. So today we will be developing a capstone project called AI driven financial data analysis, which would be completely done by Google Gemini. So the use case is like, we are going to more or less build a business intelligence kind of application. So what is a business intelligence application even before we deep dive into Google Gemini usage and everything, right? So in a real world scenario, a business application is something which, any application that is used for any business purpose, right? In our case, let's say there are financial data available, uh, usually released by financial institutions, right? So, uh, in a traditional or in a real-time scenario in an organization, there will be applications built to analyze this financial data that is readily available, right? So after analyzing this data, the data would be available for users to derive insights out of it. So now the use case that I have picked up to explore with Gemini is to build a business intelligence application or to build an application which would analyze financial data that from the top five Canadian banks. So I'm based out of Canada. So there are five of the top banks that are available in Canada. And all these banks, they release their financial data every quarter, right? And this financial data is publicly available. It is available in their websites. So usually if you go to a bank's website, there is usually an investor relations page. And if you click on the investor relations page, you can see their quarterly releases. So they release it on Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. So this financial information, it talks about what is the bank's net worth, what is the revenue for that quarter, what is the dividend per share that the bank offered to its shareholders. So there are a lot of metrics available. There are a lot of data available. Financial analysis itself is a vast topic. So we'll not get into the financial analysis domain or the topic. We'll stick on to how we are building an application to analyze this financial data using Google Gemini. So what we are going to do is we are going to build an application using Google Gemini's capabilities, right? And using Google Gemini's capabilities, we are going to build a AI-driven data integration and a data analysis platform. So as I said, banks, even before I get into the details, right? So today's session, how I want to keep it is the code that is written to build this application utilizing Gemini's capabilities is already available in my Kaggle notebook, which I made it as public. So I'll give the link to this notebook in the description of the video. So you can open this, go through the code, you can start executing the code and everything. So today's session will be like more or less like a detailed code walkthrough, and I'll also show the output of each section. I've also written a Medium blog post. I'll again put the link of this blog post in the description. So this blog post also explains in detail about this use case. So now coming back to the use case, as I said, the financial information about each bank is released by the bank and is available in their websites, and it is also available in other public websites every quarter. So once this data is available every quarter, what do organizations do with this data? They pull this data then they kind of massage this data, transform this data, they load this data into their data stores so that any financial analyst or any executive leadership team, they can derive insights out of this data, right? And this data is crucial basically to do financial analysis, which is crucial for making informed decisions, identifying the key trends, to know what my peers are doing, such things, right? So the traditionally, how was this financial analysis done? When the data is available in the internet, right? Usually organizations, what they do is they build a data pipeline, right? A traditional data pipeline. So I mean, for this session, I'm going to toggle between two windows, which would be the Medium blog post and the Kaggle notebook. As I said, I have written a detailed blog post explaining what I'm speaking now. So if you want to go through the blog post, you can go through that as well. So now coming back to the traditional data pipeline that we were talking about. So this is how it looks like, right? So if the information is available in the internet, which is the source, what an organization would do is it will usually build a ETL application, which will extract the data, which will load the data into databases, and then there are financial analysts and other users who will be querying this database to know what insights they want. Or there will be other applications which will be utilizing the data available in the data store. So this is a typical traditional data pipeline, right? So now what we are going to do here is we are going to more or less do the same functionality, but through AI driven. We are going to build an intelligent data platform to do the same process. So before we move on to the process, what is the limitation with the existing approach, right? Obviously, collecting and organizing the data in itself is a process, and the turnaround times can be slow, it can be error prone. The main disadvantage that I see, not a disadvantage, the main lack that I would say today is, like, we don't have natural language data interaction, right? So if we go back to this diagram, for us to get the data from the DB, we need to know some sort of technical knowledge. To get the data from the required source, again, technology is needed. Some sort of tech is needed. To put the data into the respective data store, again, some sort of tech is needed, right? So that natural language used for all this process is not available today. So what we are going to do is we are going to build an application which will build a robust and intelligent data integration and a data analysis platform to build our AI-driven application, right? So what we are going to do is I'll come to all these features as we go through the code in detail, code sections in detail. So now, going back to the uh, details of the code. So what I've done here is I've imported all the required libraries. Again, this Kaggle notebook is on Python. I have imported all the required libraries. I've installed whatever packages are required, which is used in this code, right? So I'm installing the Gemini Gen AI package, and importing all the required libraries and everything. I have set up my API key, so I'm already using the API key that is already available, and then I am setting up some code for automatic retry in case if Gemini model has to retry whatever functionality it is doing. So this piece of code will help in retrying. So now coming to the exact code. First, we are going to create a database, and that database is called as financial data database, right? And then in that database, we are going to create three tables. The first one is called as bank info, bank quarterly metrics, and bank calculated quarterly metrics. Bank info, let's say that would be a dimension table, and these two tables would be fact tables. And in the bank info table, since it's a dimension table, we'll insert the bank details. As we discussed in the previous sometime back, we are going to analyze 5 banks data, right? So here, if you see, we will be inserting the details of 5 banks into the bank info table. And these are the bank names and bank code: BMO, Scotia, TD, RBC, and CIBC. And I have created 2 more fact tables, which is quarterly metrics table and calculated quarterly metrics table. So now what the code is going to do is, after inserting the data into the dimension table, then we are writing the user-defined functions. So what are these user-defined functions? We are going to use Gemini's function calling capability. So Gemini should know what user-defined functions it should execute against these tables in the database. So Gemini is going to use all these functions which is defined here. So now the list table function, it is going to list down all the tables that is available in the database. Describe table, it is going to list down the metadata of the table. Execute query, it is going to execute SQL statements, right? SQL select statements. And then this is the main functionality: calculate and insert quarterly metrics. This function, it is going to calculate the quarterly metrics Q on Q, which we call it as quarter over quarter growth. It is going to calculate that metrics and it is going to insert it into this table, the calculate quarterly metrics table. This function has some logic where this, it is going to pick the data from quarterly metrics table, which is available for each quarter for all the banks. And then it is going to calculate the quarter over quarter growth metrics. The formula is basically simple. We want to see the quarter over quarter metrics, right? So the formula is pretty straightforward. So what we are going to do is we are going to take the value of current quarter and previous quarter. Then we are going to calculate the growth. What is the growth when compared to the previous quarter for each of the metric? So that is what this entire function is doing. And it will be inserting the quarter on quarter growth metrics into the bank calculated quarterly metrics table. So that's about the 4 user-defined functions that we have created in our application. So now first what we are going to do is we need data, right? Now we have created the tables. We have created the database. We created 3 tables. We inserted data into dimension table. We defined all the user-defined functions. So now we need the source data. So what we are going to do is, in this application, we will use data from 2024 and we will use 1 quarter data from 2025 because only 1 quarter is completed for 2025. So now we have to get the entire data for 2024. 2024 has 4 quarters. So we need 4 quarters data, right? So what we are doing here is we are going to use Gemini 2.0 Flash model, which will be extracting the data from the bank's websites. It will be transforming the data as we ask, and then it is going to map the data in the required format that we want. And everything is done in one single prompt, right? So if you see here, I have written a function, and this function, it is going to get the last 2 quarters data of 2024. So to get the last 2 quarters data, this is the prompt that I'm passing to the function. So what I'm telling here is, I'm telling Gemini that you are a helpful assistant and you have to generate data in a structured format. And where do you get this data from? I'm asking Gemini to take this data from the respective bank's websites because the data is publicly available in the bank's websites. And I'm telling get the data for last 2 quarters for me. And I'm more specific, Q4 and Q3 2024 is what I'm interested in now. And then I'm telling I need only these metrics for my calculations. And then I am giving an instruction that I want all the amounts to be converted in millions, right? And I'm telling this should be my output format. My output should be in JSON format, and I'm giving the JSON schema to Gemini so that when it is extracting all these metrics from the website, it is going to map these metrics to the JSON format that is passed. So now, how are we achieving AI driven intelligence here, right? So usually if we go back to our traditional approach, right, we will have a ETL application which will be extracting this data and then transforming this data, mapping this data, cleaning this data and everything, right? So ETL applications like Informatica, Data Stage, Talent, PySpark, such applications will be helpful to extract the data, transform the data, cleanse the data, and then load the data to DB. So what we are doing here is we are telling Gemini in a natural language that this is the data that has to be extracted. I'm sorry. This is the data that has to be extracted, and the source is the bank's website. And I am like more specific, telling I need only the data for last 2 quarters, and I am giving the transformation also here, meaning I'm telling all the amount should be converted in millions only, which is the transformation part. So, and then I'm giving the output format also, that the data should be displayed in JSON format, right? So the extraction part is extract from the bank's website, get all these metrics. The transformation part is transform the data into millions, meaning all the amounts into millions. And the mapping part is the data that you got, map it to this JSON schema. So all this is intelligently done by Gemini. What I'm doing is I'm passing this prompt in simple English. Going back to our traditional method, the entire, more or less, whatever ETL is doing, the extraction part, the transformation part, the mapping part, I'm passing it in a prompt here, and Gemini is going to do the magic for me. We'll see the output in some time, but I want to give a detailed walkthrough of the code. So now, this function is going to get the data for last 2 quarters of 2024. And then once we have the data in JSON format, we are loading this data to a table. We are putting it in a pandas data frame, and then we are loading it to our bank quarterly metrics table. Similarly, I have written another function to get the data for first 2 quarters of 2024. Here the prompt remains the same, except for here we are telling first 2 quarters of 2024, right? So again, I need the same metrics. I need it for first 2 quarters. I want all the amounts to be converted into millions only. I need the data for all the 5 banks, and take the data from bank's website and then map the data to this JSON schema. So with this function, again, once I have the data, I'm going to put it into pandas data frame, and then I'm loading it to our bank quarterly metrics table. Now we have the data for 2024 available in our table, right? Now, so here, before moving on to the next step, what capability of Gemini did we use here? We used 2 capabilities of Gemini here. One obviously is prompt engineering. Our prompt was perfect for Gemini to understand what exactly we need. That way, Gemini was able to convert this natural language into a backend code, whatever is required to extract the data, connect to the website API and everything. All those magic happens in the backend. So prompt engineering is the very first capability. The second capability we used here is we used structured output capability of Gemini, which is the JSON schema, right? I am telling Gemini that the output for the prompt that you give me should be in a structured format, and it should be in JSON format, and this is the format, right? So here we have used 2 capabilities of Gemini. Now moving on, now we want the data for Q1 2025. As you know, this Gemini model, the Flash model, is trained as of Jan 30, 2025. But the quarterly data for Q1 2025 was released by all the banks only in February. So if I ask Gemini, Gemini may not have this information. That is why I'm going to use grounding feature so that Gemini can use Google search to get the latest data that I'm requesting for. So here, the capability that we are using is grounding, right? So if you see here, the same prompt is more or less the same. Here I'm telling I need the data for all the 5 banks for the latest quarter, which is 2025. And again, I'm telling I want the amounts to be converted in millions. and take the data from the bank's websites only, and then use this JSON schema to map the data. But the only change here is I'm passing some configurations when I'm calling the model. So what does this configuration do? It is going to enable grounding, and it is telling use Google search for grounding. So this prompt, it will be searching in Google so that it will be able to retrieve the latest information. So now once this function executes, again, we are loading the data back to our bank quarterly metrics table. So now we have all the required data available in our table, right? We did the extraction process, we did the transformation process, we loaded the data to the table. So going back to our traditional diagram, more or less the ETL process is what we did now, right? Gemini did. Okay. Now we have the data. So what we are going to do is, with this data, we are going to calculate the quarter over quarter growth metrics and then insert that into a separate table, which is called as bank calculated quarterly metrics table. And we have created a user-defined function for that. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to use Gemini, especially Gemini's function calling capability, so that Gemini will be able to call this user-defined function, calculated the quarterly metrics, and then load it to a new table. So let's see, how Gemini will do this, right? So here what I'm doing is I'm instructing Gemini that you are a helpful chatbot who's going to interact with the SQL database. And I'm telling Gemini that there are tools available for you to interact with the database. And what are those tools? Those tools are the user-defined functions that we created earlier. I'm telling Gemini that use these tools, interact with the database, and do what I'm asking you to do, right? So first, what I'll ask Gemini to do is, I'll ask Gemini to calculate and insert the quarterly metrics for one of the banks for Q1 2025. So I'm just passing a prompt here. So ideally, what I'm doing here is data enrichment, right? So once I have the source data, I'm enriching the data, meaning I am deriving some attributes out of this data and loading those attributes to a different table. That is again part of any ETL process, right? Once you have the data, you may not load the data as is. With that data, you derive some other data and then load the data back to your database. So that's what we are doing here. I have the data in my quarterly metrics table. I am deriving quarterly metrics, meaning quarter over quarter growth, and then I am loading it back to a new table. But I am doing this with a single prompt, right? Gemini is doing that for me. So I'm asking Gemini, calculate and insert the quarterly metrics. That's all. So now Gemini understands that it has to execute a user-defined function, and using that user-defined function, it has to interact with the database, right? So that's what happens. I'll show the output in a minute, but with all these prompts, Gemini actually calls the user-defined functions, and it also loads to the table. So what kind of AI intelligence are we achieving here? We are able to do data enrichment, meaning we are able to derive attributes through data enrichment and load it back to the table. And how did we do this? We are using function calling capability of Gemini. So now we have data available in bank quarterly metrics and bank calculated quarterly metrics table. Now we have all the data available in our database. Going back to our traditional diagram, now there are users who can talk to this database, right? To do all the data analysis, users can talk to this database, and going by the traditional approach, they don't have to talk using SQL language. They can talk in their natural language. Gemini understands the natural language. It converts to SQL. It executes the queries. It gives the responses back in natural language. So let's see. So here I'm just asking one question to Gemini. Which bank performed well in Q1 2025? Consider these three metrics and give me the result, right? So Gemini understands that it has to execute the user-defined function using the function calling capability. It is going to call the respective user-defined function. It is going to execute the query. It is going to give the result back to us. So now if I show the result here, I've already executed this notebook and it executes without any issues, without any errors. That's where I'm able to show the output immediately. I'll come back to all the output also. I'll give a walkthrough of all the output also. But since we are talking about the prompts, I want to show the output immediately so that it is easy to relate. So if you see here, right? So this is the question that we asked, like, which bank performed well considering these three metrics. So here, what is the Gemini doing? It understands that it has to execute a user-defined function. So it is executing all the required user-defined functions. It is executing the required SQL query, and it is returning the output to me in natural language. It is giving me the data telling, like, these two banks performed well in Q1 2025. And what is the reasoning behind it? Like, it is giving me the reasoning also. So here, Gemini is able to automatically generate the SQL code, execute the SQL code, and give me the results back in natural language. So we have asked, like, so many prompts to Gemini, and each of these prompts has multiple reasoning also that Gemini has to do, meaning it has to join multiple tables, it has to do aggregation queries. So everything Gemini does on its own, right? It generates the required SQL queries on its own. So for example, in this query, it does aggregation. In this query, it applies filter conditions. It does a order by, which means, like, descending order sort. And here it does a join. So based on the prompt, Gemini understands what sort of query it has to execute. So all these queries, Gemini uses function calling capability to execute these queries and give the results back. Now let's pass some few short prompting queries to Gemini to see how it behaves, right? So here I'm passing a sample few short prompt. Here I'm telling Gemini that, this is how I want my output, right? So here I'm telling BMO in Q1 2025. This is the report for BMO in Q1 2025. Similarly, for RBC in Q2 2024, this is the report. So now I'm asking Gemini, how does TD look for Q1 2025? So if you know few short prompting, I am explaining Gemini that, this is how my prompt looks like, so that Gemini understands what I'm asking Gemini to do, and it is going to give me the result in the same format. So if we go back to our output, this is how few short prompts looks like, right? So these are the two things that I trained Gemini in my prompt itself, and Gemini understands what I'm expecting. It is giving me a report telling this particular metric, earnings per share, has increased for TD. Okay. So that is a sample few short prompting that we passed Gemini, and we trained Gemini in our prompt itself, right? And then we have written some more user-defined functions for data visualization. Again, for example, this particular function gets chart details from Gemini, right? So this is going to understand the user prompt. It is going to identify what will be the X and Y axis for my bar graph. So here it takes the table description, it takes the chart prompt, it identifies what is the X axis and Y axis using Gemini, right? So, and then this function is to fetch the data from the database. This function is to plot the bar chart. So here I am passing a prompt telling show a bar chart of bank revenue for Q1 2025. And here I am calling the function get chart details from Gemini. So Gemini is going to take this prompt. It will understand this prompt. It will understand what field is available in the table. It is going to give me what should be the x-axis, y-axis for the graph, and what should be my bar chart title. right? And then I'm calling the respective functions so that my graph gets plotted. And this is how my graph looks like. So here, this is the prompt that I passed, and this is the query that gets executed. Gemini identifies the x-axis, y-axis, and the chart title, and it plots a graph for me. So a sample graph showing the revenue for all the banks in Q1 2025. Similarly, a sample graph showing another metric for Q2 2024. Right? So that's about it. So that is the AI capability. That's Gemini's capability. That's the AI driven financial data analysis application that we have developed. Now, going to the code output quickly. So if you see here, you can execute this notebook. It will execute without any errors. Since I've already executed, I am able to navigate and show the output quickly. So here, first step, we created the database, we created the required tables, we inserted data into our dimension table, and then we passed a prompt to Gemini to do the magic, meaning to do the AI data intelligence, right? The extraction part, the transformation part, automatically mapping the data in the required format, everything is done in the prompt itself. And we used prompt engineering and we used JSON's structured output capability, right? And this is how the JSON output looks like. For our first prompt, when I asked the data for last 2 quarters of 2024, Gemini was able to pull the data for me and it was able to return the data in JSON format for me, right? Similarly, for Q1 2024, Q1 and Q2 2024 as well, Gemini is returning the output in JSON format. And then we used grounding feature of Gemini to get the latest data for Q1 2025. And this is the data again, which is returned in JSON format, right? And here we have used grounding feature to get the latest data using Google search. So that's the JSON data for Q1 2025. Once I have all the data and the data is loaded to my first fact table, then we used Gemini's function calling capability to do data enrichment, meaning to derive certain more attributes and load it to another table called bank calculated quarterly metrics table. So once the data is available in both the tables, then we passed user queries in natural language. Gemini was able to convert it into SQL queries, execute it against our database, and give the results back to me. Again, we used the function calling feature of Gemini. So these are like, sample prompts and what is the response we got from Gemini, right? So Gemini was able to calculate and insert the data to our bank calculated quarterly metrics table. And then Gemini was able to accept all our or take all our prompts, convert it into queries, and then give the response back to us. And we also tried some complex queries which involves multi-step reasoning. Say, for example, here I'm asking Gemini that as an investor, which bank would be my best bet in terms of profitability and dividend share. So Gemini was able to execute the query. It was able to give me a proper reasoning, right? Here again, I'm asking Gemini for an insightful summary. Again, Gemini was able to give me an insightful summary with proper reasoning. And finally, we also did some few short prompts. We trained Gemini in our prompt itself. Gemini understood what we are asking and it was able to give the output in our required format, right? So this is the prompt that I passed to Gemini, a complex prompt that I passed to Gemini. And Gemini was able to fetch all the required data. It was able to give me the report that I wanted, right? It was able to do a trend analysis here. And then we used Gemini to do some data visualization also for certain metrics. So that's about it. That's a detailed code walkthrough of what I did using Google Gemini to build a AI-driven financial data analysis application. And the blog post is also available on Medium. I'll give the link in the description. So You guys go through it, try to execute the notebook, and if you have any comments, please leave it in the comment section. And if you have any queries, please post it. I'll try to answer. Thanks a lot. Thanks for today's sessions. Thank you.